All right, let's talk about Constellation on Apple TV Plus. The first 3 episodes debuted last week. I think the 4th episode, it may already be available as we're recording this, but we are going to start in one sentence or less. Patrick Klepek, should people watch Constellation on Apple TV Plus?
I don't know. Because I don't know how it wraps up. And I think that may be my short version of if I'm very curious to see how it wraps up, but in 3 episodes in, it's a big mystery box, and it's going to live or die by how those things do or don't wrap up. So for now, I'm sort of maybe.
Jessie Earl, should people watch Constellation on Apple TV Plus?
I would say I agree completely with Patrick on that, with the asterisk of this show is my shit. I like everything about the show, like weird quantum mechanics check, like cool like space sciencey stuff check, weird horror visuals and possibly parallel worldsy stuff like check. Like it is very much what I love about it. So I enjoyed this show very heavily, and if that's your jam, I would recommend it. But if it is not necessarily your jam, then I would agree with Patrick. Like, wait until the show is over, hear what people say, and then maybe check it out if people feel it wrapped up well.
Yeah, Patrick, I think you summed it up really well. This is a show that has 1, 2, possibly 3 central mysteries to it. I have a feeling they're somewhat connected, and by the end we will figure it out. But in the meantime, they're just showing you a lot of spooky things that are happening, spooky things, and the spooky things are done pretty well. But essentially, it will all hinge on whether this mystery is satisfying and whether it's done well by the end of the show. And right now, we cannot tell you whether that's the case. But let's talk about what we actually do know about what happens in these few episodes. I'll just read the recaps on the Apple TV Plus app. In episode 1, The Wounded Angel, a disaster on board the ISS becomes a fight for survival. In episode 2, Live and Let Die, Jo races to find a way back to Earth before her life support runs out. Meanwhile, Henry, played by Jonathan Banks, is concerned about his experiment. And in episode 3, Somewhere in Space Hangs My Heart, the space agencies begin their investigation into the ISS collision while Jo struggles to reconnect with Magnus and Alice, her estranged husband and daughter. I should mention, of course, Jo is played by the great Noomi Rapace. I want to say MVP of the show. I mean, she is committed to this role. She is giving it her all, regardless of how ridiculous some of the stuff that she has to do is. What did you think of Noomi Rapace's performance in Constellation, Patrick Klepek?
She's great. I mean, this is the kind of actor that you can just put a close-up on their face, and there's so much to read off of it. And the show hinges a lot on you reacting to her reacting to something slightly off and not necessarily having an answer to it that is. So it requires a certain actor to be, especially as you're, depending on where you fall on the spectrum, as Jessie was saying, like in terms of your interest level in these core ideas, these core themes, these core like, ooh, what's going on here? Like, depending on where you fall on that, then you have to start falling back on other things to maintain your interest in the show as you wait for more domino pieces to fall. And you can do far worse than her. Like, she is just a very compelling actor that is very good at looking slightly confused and horrified.
Indeed. I want to describe for you both my experience of watching the show. Now, the reviews came out before we actually are recording this. And so I would say a significant percentage of the reviews were negative on the show. One of our favorites, Alan Sepinwall, gave it a pretty negative review. And I think most of the reviews summed up to, this is the concept of a movie that was stretched out to be like an 8-episode long series, and it should not have been stretched out. That was kind of what a lot of the reviews said. And so I started watching, and longtime listeners of Decoding TV will know I hate that shit. And so I started watching thinking, I'm gonna keep watching until I like start disliking this. And I'm going to finish the first 3 episodes because that's what we agreed on. But I'll probably stop after that because I assume I'm going to lose interest by episode 3. So I watched episode 1 and I thought, actually, that episode rocks. That was an awesome
Mhm.
episode. Then I watched episode 2 and 3, and I was thinking, I was waiting for me to start hating this. I was waiting for me to be like getting frustrated, and it never came. That moment never came. I kind of was still into it by the end of the third episode, and not only that, there's some great stuff in the third episode. You know, as I mentioned, this investigation over what happens at ISS goes on in the third episode, and there's all this bureaucracy of like what happens when you have three different countries trying to agree on the same version of events, and I found that to be fascinating. So by episode 3, I'm still really into the show. Now maybe it goes way downhill after episode 3, but so far I'm still pretty engaged to my surprise. Let me ask you about episode 1. I mean, I thought episode 1 was great. It felt like Gravity, Alfonso Cuarón's Gravity style uh thriller where something goes wrong in space and they need to deal
Mhm.
with it. And I just thought it was really well done. Jesse Earl, what were your thoughts on the opening episode?
I agree. I think what makes the show work very well, because we've been joking about like all the spooky aspects and all of that stuff. Just to keep using that phrase. And I have thoughts about like
gotta say it that way too. You
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
just say
absolutely.
spooky. You can't just say spooky.
Yeah.
Spooky stuff. The characters say it in the show too. It's very weird. No, but we've been joking about all of that, and I find that stuff super fascinating. It gets into like quantum mechanics stuff that I'll talk about later if we want to, because that's again very much my jam, and I love that stuff. But what I think makes the show work so well is that it grounds that in like actual hard sci-fi, like this inner workings of the ISS, seeing the daily lives of that, seeing of them having to deal with like when something goes wrong, like them having to deal with their life support going out, having to go and check out all the systems, like just the mundanity of something like that going on and dealing with the bureaucracy of it, grounding it in that, I think, is what makes it still stay intriguing moment to moment, so that when the weird stuff happens, you're not just like, oh, there's just a bunch of weird things happening. I can't connect to it. You're still grounded in the world that then makes the weird stuff feel properly weird. And so I think that's what really makes it work. And going off of the first episode specifically, like just seeing them have to deal with this like just random catastrophe, and them having to run around and just like dealing with stuff like having to try and help a guy as he's dying with his blood spraying everywhere in zero gravity. Like that's how it's the show isn't overly gory, but it does have a little bit of it. Just seeing that sort of stuff was very thrilling to watch.
Yeah, yeah. And also this weird situation where Numi Rapace's character Joe sees what she thinks impacted their ship. A dead Russian cosmonaut. That's what she believes impacted her ship. And no one else sees it, right? And every Russian cosmonaut in the history of mankind has been accounted for. So what did she see? She was just seeing something. I did really enjoy when they're presenting what bags of trash look like in human form.
Yeah.
They almost look like AI generated because it's like so close to what a human would look like. But it's like, imagine if we shaped a bag of trash like a human. Is it possible this is what you saw? Anyway, Patrick Klepek, did you enjoy the first episode?
I did. And the first episode has the least amount of the part that's bugging me throughout the other episodes, which is the show constantly feeling like it's getting a little ahead of itself to go, hey, shit doesn't seem right, does it? Huh?
Yeah.
Like, seems a little weird, huh? Like, stuff's going on. And it's like, I feel like the show is like raising its eyebrows at me, like, don't think things are as they seem, do they, buddy? It's like, yeah, I'm aware. Show, like, I get it. And I think maybe some of that has to do with having to dole out, chop this up over the course of more episodes. We'll see as the show goes on how it manages that. But part of the reason the first episode works as well as it does is because it's like very concerned with the brass tacks of what do you do in the middle of a disaster. It's what makes Gravity work. It's what makes like this episode at its best work, which is you get to watch it's fun to watch smart people do smart things in the face of great adversity or panic. And you get to see a bunch of smart people, including the rest of the crew, right? It's not just Joe. It's this entire crew of people dealing with something truly extraordinary before we have any sense of what are the potentially extraordinary events or supernatural, however the show ends up characterizing it, events that led to them having to deal with well, his hand is cut, connected to the spaceship now as everything falls apart. And I think that part of it is really, really compelling. And it's the balance between those things that I feel like is a little off in 2 and 3, but like works really, really well in that first episode.
Agreed. And the story continues into the second episode where she basically needs to find her way home against all odds, and she does. I will say I was a little bummed that the episode 1 begins with what is essentially a flash forward.
Yeah.
So we know that she survives, and it's like, yes, Numi Rapace is on the poster, so we probably know that she's going to survive anyway. But it was still kind of like, I don't think we needed to see all that stuff in the first episode. Like the flash forward stuff. Like they could have held that back. Jessie Earl, you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I have many thoughts. How do I say this? Because a question I would have is, but did she survive? Because
yes, okay, there you go.
Because that is the
it's a fair point. It's a fair point.
A question that the show raises. Because and this is actually something too. Just jumping into this, the other aspect of it that I do like is that the weird stuff kind of is buttressing her own emotional arc too. So we have the stuff with the weird, like, she saw a Russian body that no one else saw. But then that leads into questions of like, do people believe her? Is she trusted? Does she trust her own memory? She's gone through a traumatic event. So like the weird elements of it are highlighting, potential systemic biases against her as a woman, but also as like, just as like, do we trust people's observation of something? And which kind of goes into the idea of the observer effect, which again, I love all these ties because we're talking about quantum mechanics. So there's the observer effect, which is something doesn't actually like particles will not resolve their state unless they are observed. Otherwise, it's like Schrodinger's box. The cat will exist as both alive and dead until the wave function collapses when observed. So like there's all these sort of things that kind of interweaving with each other emotionally and thematically in with the quantum mechanics that I thought was a lot of fun. And then, getting into your, like, does she survive? It's one of those sort of I'm trying to. Are we allowed to do full spoilers? I don't know exactly what the rules are.
Full spoilers for the 3 episodes, not for any future episodes.
Yeah. I haven't seen any of the future episodes. So, I mean, there's this question of, since we're dealing with quantum mechanics here, and Jonathan Banks' character, who's also great in this, is talking about like how, there's a new state of matter and all of that jazz. It gets into this possibility of alternate worlds that the show is kind of jumping between. So then the question becomes, it seems like she potentially didn't survive in one of the worlds, and that's why she has a different daughter in one. So it's
right.
There's some
or
fun
maybe
stuff
there's a universe where she survived and one where she didn't.
Exactly.
And that's why people think she's behaving very bizarrely, or she's essentially experiencing a different version of reality than other people are. Right.
I think the show may be playing with that as well, because we see in episode 3 2 stories of Jonathan Banks, both him dealing with like the stuff going on the station, but then also him sort of dealing with being called up for his memory changing, like in what seems like a slight flashback. But then I also raised the question of like, maybe that's a different universe instead of an alternate, or instead of a flashback. So there's just some fun structural stuff there too.
I loved all that ISS Truth Finding Commission stuff in episode 3. I just thought that was. So it's such an interesting concept of what you would do if you're in that situation. You see something, no one else believes you. They're literally throwing 15 different explanations at you for why you didn't see what you saw. And it's like in your benefit to just say, yeah, you're right. It was a bag of trash shaped suspiciously like a human. And that's what it was, because they're all just trying to avoid taking financial responsibility for something impacting the ISS. Right. And so it's like a very fascinating idea. I also got to say, MVP of the show, one of the MVPs of the show for me, other than Numi Rapace, is the woman who plays the, I want to say, Russian boss, Irene Lishenko, played by Barbara Sukova. I wasn't really familiar with her work too much before this show, but she is just such a compelling presence, and someone who I fear. Watching the show, it's like I would be afraid of that person if they were on the other end of the testimony table. Let me ask you quickly before we move on to Shogun about the Jonathan Banks stuff. I was not a huge fan of like Jonathan Banks in the show so far, it seems really disconnected from. I know it's probably related, Jesse, but it's like plot wise, it seems really disconnected from the rest of the plot. His part of the plot so far.
Yeah.
The dialogue just feels really pretty clunky to me.
Hmm.
Just not loving the Jonathan Banks of it all. And I love Jonathan Banks in Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad. Patrick Klepek, how's Jonathan Banks as the character of what's his name, Henry, working for you in the show Constellation?
Well, every time we get around him, we get to hear a big glowing object go. It's pretty weird. Like that object's probably doing some fucked up stuff. Like what could it be? Like, hey, show, it's okay. I get it. You don't like to be subtle. That thing is making like that. It does that on the ISS. Like nobody thinks this like chip going like gadong gadong is like. No, we're good with that. It's just a little experiment. Okay, fine. I'm with like he's fine. It's hard to judge much of anything about his character and the arc, what he's putting into it as an actor, because I think so much is contingent on where it goes. It feels like later parts of the show pulled in sooner that will click, like if done right, click into place and maybe are more satisfying with a little more hindsight. But only kind of functions as padding at the moment for a show that I think honestly would have been stronger if it doubled down on the elements that seem to work the best for all three of us, which are like the bureaucracy, like the operating of the shuttle, like all that stuff is strong. And at times I feel like the show is not confident in its ability to have that carry it, and is like, gotta put this mystery. Like it's almost like the buzzing of that chip or whatever it is the show lacking a confidence to just sit with that stuff for like, if you're going to be a slow show, be a slow show. I think it'd be a better show if it was sitting with that stuff and doling out its mystery box stuff. Even the, like, as you mentioned, David, the framing of the first episode in this cabin, it feels like it's just trying too hard to start up front with like, it's stuff's weird, stuff's off. Let's go find out what happened.
Like, why would they feel the need to do that unless it feels like the show doesn't actually need to do that. It could have just started on ISS. Don't do the mystery like we can get to I have a feeling there's going to be plenty more mystery spooky stuff later on, so like you don't need to drop it in the very beginning of the first episode.
The good like the wave that happened, like what's one of the most effective like spooky scenes. It's very subtle. It's not a jump scare or anything like that. Is kind of like the hand wave or like the person she sees that like releases the latch as she's trying to come back to Earth. And I couldn't help but keep imagining a show that allowed that stuff to land as more shocking and spooky if the show wasn't so upfront about, hey, this is a show where some weird stuff's going to happen. Right, because like I know that going into it, but I just wish it was a little more subtle, because it would allow moments like that to just land like so much more shockingly and be so much more unsettling. But instead, I feel like all the time the show is just reminding me that like it's pulsing in my ear in the same way that Chip is. But I do agree with Jesse that like the fundamental, when I talk about the show, as we talk about the show, those building blocks sound really compelling, and I'm rooting for the show to put them together in an interesting way.
Jessie Earl, you want to take us home on this one? Any thoughts on Jonathan Banks or any other overall thoughts on Constellation on Apple TV Plus?
No, I think I agree with Patrick completely. I do think that that when it hits really, really hard. I do agree the framing device of the cabin, it feels too symbolic rather than actually tying me in. It's like ooh, here's a symbolic way to represent all the stuff that we're talking about here, rather than actually feeling grounded in anything. And I feel like that is a bridge too far. Other than that, like I like I said before, this show is very much my jam. Anytime a show has to explain the observer effect to somebody, I'm like, I'm in. Chips, I'm all in. So I really love this show, but I agree completely. Like if it isn't exactly your niche, it's one of those like just wait until episode 8. I think it's an 8-episode show. Wait until episode 8 comes out. Look at the like spoiler-free reviews that say, it hits the mark or it doesn't. And I think the show would probably work better in a binge rather than sort of a week-to-week sort of thing.
Absolutely. Completely agreed there. I have one final thought on this, folks. In the final episode, third episode, I think we get a flashback to Jonathan Banks' character doing what appears to be a panel with a conspiracy theorist.
Mm.
Uh-huh.
And then he gets very irritated at this guy. he goes over to his dinner table in full view of his friends, and says, "Hey, let's take a walk." And then he becomes the last person to see this guy alive. And I've read an article. You ever read an article or watch a video or whatever that changes the course of your life? I read one such article, and it was about what happens when people fall off of cruise ships.
Mm.
Oh, man.
And essentially, like, if you fall off a cruise ship, it's very difficult for you to survive.
Wow.
Because you only have like a few minutes essentially before you get hypothermia or whatever from the water. And the ship usually doesn't. The ship has thousands of people on it, so it's usually not going to turn itself around, disrupt the schedule of thousands of people for maybe a tiny chance they might find you. So after I read that article, I decided I'm never going on a cruise.
Wow, you just ruined cruises for me.
They're basically like mobile cities. They don't have their own, they don't adhere to United States law. They're basically mobile cities with their own legal system, where there is tons of alcohol everywhere. And it's just like, people every year, certain number of people fall off cruise ships and are never found, or they're never, they don't survive. And so, not going on cruise ships. And so that's how I felt watching Jonathan Banks throw that guy off the edge. I'm like, that guy, it's going to be hours until his friends realize something is off, and then by then he's gone. Like there's nothing they can do. Anyway, you're welcome, everyone. You're
Yeah,
welcome.
thanks for that. I have friends on a cruise ship right now. I appreciate that.
All right. Anyway, so that's the moral of Constellation. Don't go on cruise ships. Okay.
Yeah, I think that adds up. I think that agreed.
Thank you.
Rather go to the ISS at this point.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.